Now, all of you who've been members for 10 years or more, please remain standing. Those of you who are members for 20 years or more, please remain standing. Now, we know, by the way, that those of you who've been members for 20 years, you would be members for 50, but you just weren't born early enough. If you've been members for 30 years or more, please remain standing. If you have been members of this Kehillah Kadosha for 40 years, please remain standing. I don't know why I'm so emotional, but actually I do. If you've been members for 50 years or more, please remain standing. Now, there's one person who is not standing. He can't stand. He's Herman Beck. And Herman Beck heard about this event and ordered a special MARTA bus to transport him here in his electric wheelchair, and he's sitting and really standing because he stands out. And Herman called and he says to me, "Rabbi, I saw every single nail go into that place." And so have many of you. Some of you have actually driven the nails in. We actually looked in our basement and we found a couple of nails, and we're going to get them sprayed gold and we're going to pass them out to our 50-year members. Now, I also want to do one more thing, and I know this has taken a lot of time, and it's worth it because this is what we're here for, to really enjoy the family that we are. I want to acknowledge multi-generational families. So if you are the second generation Beth Jacob person, please stand. And, or, if you have an adult child who's a member of this synagogue, please stand. So we get a sense. Amazing. And if you don't consider them adults, stand anyway. Thank you all, and you can all be seated. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. Now, before I turn things over to Dr. David Mitchell, our president, I want to acknowledge one more special group of people and ask them as well to be recognized by standing. And these are the people who indeed stood up and shouldered responsibility for this shul over the past 50 years and beyond. And I'm going to ask spouses as well to stand if their husbands are not present among the living, because they've been partners in this with their husbands or wives, and spouses whose husbands are with us as well, or husbands, as the case may be, spouses as well, please stand. And please, as I call your name, please stand. I'm going to call, first of all, Carl Golden for his father. May rest in peace, Ben Golden. Gladys Hirsch, who I know is planning to be here for, there she is, hi Gladys, for her husband Jack. Mrs. Edwin Galler, Lillian, are you here? I know she was planning to be here tonight. There she is, Lillian. Mr. and Mrs. Ben Hirsch. Mr. and Mrs. Neil Bush. Mr. and Mrs. Abe Ezrell. We mentioned Mr. and Mrs. Louis Taratu. They weren't able to make it tonight. Mr. and Mrs. Bob Marin. Mr. and Mrs. Irvin Rabinowitz. Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Levin. Mr. Herb Mendel. Mr. and Mrs. Sai Landi. Mr. and Mrs. Alan Scher. Dr. and Mrs. Arnie Schneider. Dr. and Mrs. Alan Lippis. Mr. and Mrs. Len Epstein, who rearranged their trip and their return from the Far East just to be here tonight. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mrs. Shalamish Klein and her husband, Jonathan. Mr. and Mrs. George Glinsky. And Mrs. Miriam Khan and her husband, Dr. Aaron Khan. And finally, on this evening of thank you, as the entire show membership gathers here, both those among the living and those who are not, we stand together and take a moment to thank two people who led this community for 39 years, who led us to this building, who grew this show from the ground up, who taught us everything we know. My parents, who are the parents to us all, Rabbi and Mrs. Emanuel and Estelle Feldman. And now it is my distinct pleasure to finish my remarks. But more than that, to give you Dr. David Mitchell, our president, representing all the past presidents of our synagogue who have served so honorably.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidvaro. Amen. That wasn't planned. I'm feeling emotional too. Thank you all for being here. In the Hallel we've been saying this week, we say, Zeh hayom asah Hashem, Agila v'nismach havo. This is the day Hashem has made. Let us rejoice and be glad on it. Indeed, this date is a landmark day for us. Just as we've been commemorating the miracle of Hanukkah, perhaps it's no less a miracle that so many of us are gathered here tonight, the fifth night of Hanukkah, in Congregation Beth Jacob in Atlanta, in Georgia, in the deep south of the United States, to celebrate 50 years in this sanctuary. Some of you are used to this phenomenon, but I'm still getting used to the idea that I'm older than a building. How did it happen? You've seen some pieces of our amazing history in the video in Heritage Hall, and you've heard from Rabbi Lon Feldman, and soon you'll hear from Rabbi Emanuel Feldman and Rabbi Freundlich. How is it we're all here? Well, some of us are all here. As we say every time we take the Sefer Torah out, Vatem advekem b'Hashem Elokeichem Hayim kolchem hayom. You who cling to Hashem, your God, you're all alive to here. You're all alive today. How did we get here? As a previous president said, if you see a turtle on a fence post, you know it didn't get up there by itself. Indeed, the Talmud asked, what happened to the stones of the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, when it was destroyed? Regarding the Second Temple, there's a legend that heaven scattered the stones all over the world. Wherever one of them landed, a synagogue was eventually built. I would suggest that at least 2 of those stones landed here, since I've heard our young people say that BJ rocks. But although we know certainly that miracles happen, we don't live our lives waiting for them to happen. We have to do our hishtadlus, our part, and then Hashem may help us. That certainly happened here. So on that note, and at the risk of leaving people out, I would like to express especially enormous thanks to Kelly Whedon and Loretta Love, our host committee chairs. Pam Williams, who shared the video and put in hours of effort, the beautiful video. Thank you, Pam. Zippy Teller and Devore Feldman, who both spent several hours setting up Heritage Hall. Carly Oschik, our communications person, who worked tirelessly for this event. Last but not least, our user-friendly ushers. So if you think tonight rocks, please come back in 2 weeks from tonight for our annual congregational meeting. I have to put a plug in for that. We have a number of exciting projects for you to get involved in as part of the Jubilee year. After all, we're just kicking things off tonight. In February, the Purim Festival and Parade with a bona fide Jubilee theme. Second, a Jubilee Collector's Edition and Honorary Journal. Third, as Rabbi Feldman mentioned already, a special new Jubilee Sefer Torah. You want to hear more about that? Come to the meeting. The renovation of our beautiful and holy sanctuary. We're soon going to be seeing some renderings, very soon. Hang on to your seats. And finally, a Jubilee Gala dinner, maybe about this time next year, I'm not sure when. Speaking of Jubilee celebrations, I'll close with a story. On their 50th wedding anniversary, a couple was asked the reason for their long and happy marriage. The husband said, "I've tried never to be selfish. After all, there is no I in the word marriage." The wife said, "For my part, I've never corrected my husband's spelling." Mazel tov.
I am a bit confused tonight, which some of you will say is not unusual. Why am I confused? Because it's at night, the shul is full, it seems like Kol Nidre night. Maybe we should make an appeal. I'm also confused because when I was rabbi, we used to be in the sanctuary first and then go out and eat. And here, we eat and then we come into the shul. I don't know what the new rabbi's doing around here, but I never did such a thing. Well, modern life, so it goes. So I'm a little bit confused. It is, of course, customary for speakers to say it's a pleasure to be here tonight. With my wife and for me, it's not just a pleasure, but it's really, truly, from the bottom of our hearts, a true privilege to be here with you tonight. Not just a true privilege, but an exciting, very moving privilege as well. 50 years in the Torah is Yovel, translated as Jubilee, the Jubilee year. And in Torah law, in the Jubilee year, things that we have purchased during the previous 50 years return to their original owner, land and that type of thing. That is to say, the Torah is telling us that there is no permanent possession, no permanent material ownership of things. But that's only material things. There is no yovel for things of the Spirit. That remains with us forever. It doesn't leave us, even in the 50th year. And what we gained during this 50-year period, which I remember so vividly, exactly 50 years ago tonight, belongs to us forever, what we gained. I mean, just look what we in this synagogue, and in fact the total Jewish community of this city, have gained in these 50 years. There is now a new respect for Torah and for Torah learning and scholarship, primarily engendered by the Kollel, but beginning even before the Kollel began. There is a deeper relationship that many of us have with God and with the Jewish people. There is top-flight quality education for adults in this synagogue, and for children, for youngsters, fine Jewish schools for boys and girls. 50 years ago, the only adult education we had in Beth Jacob was a Tuesday morning Torah study group for women that met every Tuesday morning. We had a large turnout, 30 or 40 or 50 women every Tuesday morning studying the weekly Sedra. But that was all we had for women. Plus, I had a Sunday morning class that met back there, because we didn't have room in the small building that we had at the time. We met back there under the ceilings in the back of the sanctuary on Sunday morning with a few men, and we learned Mishnah, Mishnayos, and a little bit of beginning of Talmud. That was all we had for adult education then. And today, look what we have. We have an entire catalog filled with classes and discussion groups and lectures, inspiring, high quality, attended by hundreds of people. Our adult education system in this shul is the envy of most synagogues in the United States. "50 years ago, the Hebrew Academy had just begun. It was in its infancy. There was no yeshiva high school. There was no Torah day school. There was no Tamima high school for girls. There was no Or Yisrael high school for boys. There was no Kollel. And today there is all of these things. And you should know and be proud that none of these would have existed without Beth Jacob, without Beth Jacob's leadership, and without Beth Jacob's people. Those things would not have come to life. So 50 is a very, very special number. And at 50, we know where we were and where we are going. It's truly nisim v'niflos, as we say in the Hanukkah prayer. It's miracles and wonders that have taken place. I look at this crowd here and I get emotional. You would too if you were in my position. And many of you are emotional sitting there. Because so many memories crowd up in the brain. Firstly, the miracle of a small group of Jewish men and women downtown in what is today near the Georgia Baptist Hospital on Boulevard, where we had our little house, our little shul of 30 or 40 members, 50 members. The chutzpah that we had to dream of an Orthodox shul in Atlanta, Georgia, in an environment that was unfriendly and hostile, and the dreams were laughable, risible. La Vista Road then was out on the sticks. La Vista Road was just a narrow road running up and down from one neighborhood to another. And Orthodoxy in general around the country and in Atlanta was on the ropes. It was down for the count. There was no hope for the future for Orthodoxy. Everybody knew that. Orthodox synagogues in Atlanta that were once Orthodox were abandoning Orthodoxy because the wave of the future pointed somewhere else. And here was this crazy group of men and women who decided they were going to move to La Vista Road out in the country and build a synagogue that would run close to $300,000 in 1960 dollars, which today runs into the millions. And then we raised the necessary funds. That's a miracle. Of sacrificial giving was the key. It was, as we say in the Hanukkah prayer, Rabim Biad Ma'atim. Stacks, everything was stacked against us. We were outnumbered, outmanned, and outgunned. We did the job. I remember as this building was going up, and these columns, I don't know what the technical name of it is, were they buttresses? These arches, there's 12 arches that go around, they're magnificent. I still get pleasure looking at them during davening. They were just naked, just going up the California redwood arches. There were traffic stoppers. People would stop on La Vista Road. You remember, Carl? People would just look because there were men up there. It looked like it was a circus. The men up there were working, putting it together, making sure it fits perfectly. People would stop. People brought cameras, take pictures of this spectacle up here on La Vista Road. And you remember, of course, we were challenged by the neighbors here who were not all Jewish in those days and who said that these strange people who are going to move into this synagogue, they have these strange customs. They walk on the Sabbath, and they have 2 kitchens, and they don't mix certain foods together, and certain foods they don't touch at all. And certain times of the year they don't eat bread, and certain times of the year they don't eat anything. They fast. Strange people are going to move into our neighborhood. And they took us to court, to the DeKalb County Commission, and you know the story. And they called on me to speak. There was a slight aroma of anti-Jewishness at that meeting by the people in the neighborhood. And I said, and I've told this story many times, but some of you haven't heard it, I said, if the founder of Christianity were to come down and land on La Vista Road with its Protestant, Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist churches and one synagogue, where do you think he would go to worship? We won that case. Remember the first year or two in this building? There was no Shabbos minyan until well into the davening. We started at 8:30, 9:15, the 10th person would come straggling in. There was no daily minyan to speak of. There was a morning minyan fairly regularly, evening minyan, particularly in the winter when mincha's at 5 or 5:30. We had to struggle every single body to come in. We used to go out in the street and ask somebody, "Are you Jewish? Come on in." Once we brought a guy in who said he was Jewish and he wasn't. We had a minyan with 9 Jews and 1 non-Jew, but all right. The Lord forgave us. We've come a long way. The hand of God was with us all the time, palpable, was with us and guided us. Now look, we have hundreds of people coming on Shabbos, men and women, number of different services, beginning at different times, beginner services, advanced services. From that to now, it's what the book of Eov, it says, Reishischa